In the late 2nd and early 3rd century AD, Rome was a city of astonishing magnificence. The dazzling gleam of the Palatine's marble walls reflected, like a mirror, the grandeur of an empire stretching from the scorching sands of Arabia to the misty shores of Britannia. Yet, behind this facade of seemingly unshakable luxury and power unfolded a tragic tale that many would have preferred to consign to oblivion. In the shadow of these majestic corridors walked, rather timidly, 11-year-old Publius Septimius Geta, son of Emperor Septimius Severus and the influential Julia Domna. He was accompanied by his elder brother Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known as Caracalla, whose demeanor combined rudeness with an authoritarian air. At first glance, it appeared to be a typical fraternal scene, but in reality, it was a prelude to impending tragedy, the beginning of a tormenting saga. Geta, the younger brother, was distinguished by his curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Books and philosophy captivated him. Caracalla, conversely, already displayed the hallmarks of a cruel tyrant. Two such disparate personalities, raised under the same roof, were soon to be locked in a struggle not only for their father's recognition, but also for control over the entire Roman Empire, where their irreconcilable natures would catalyze a ruthless confrontation. Behind the opulent facade of the imperial palace lay carefully guarded secrets, too dangerous for the pens of court chroniclers. Only fragmented evidence, such as decaying chronicles, scraps of inscriptions, and personal letters, allows us to reconstruct the true picture of the struggle for power, ambition, and bloodshed. This story extends far beyond a typical dynastic conflict. It is like an X-ray of an empire whose insatiable craving for absolute control awakened the basest instincts of its rulers. It is a narrative of how the pursuit of dynastic immortality resulted in a loss of moral compass, and it all began with two brothers whose childhoods were steeped in mutual suspicion and burdened by an unbearable weight of power they were unable to share. At the very heart of the imperial residence, where corridor walls were adorned with mosaic tapestries depicting legendary heroes, and the garden air was fragrant with laurel and roses, Septimius Severus's sons grew up under vastly different circumstances. Caracalla, born in 188 AD, displayed an untamable disposition from a young age. Courtiers noted his quick temper, impatience, and a dangerous propensity for aggression. Unlike typical childhood pastimes, he preferred weapon drills, simulated battles, and anything that allowed him to assert dominance over his peers. Military tutors, impressed by his discipline, treated him as a future warrior. In the shadow of the warlike Caracalla grew his brother Geta, born just a year later, yet seemingly belonging to an entirely different universe. His nature was marked by deep introspection and heightened sensitivity. He spent his time in conversations with tutors expounding the wisdom of Greek philosophers, transcribing poetic verses, and honing his oratorical skills. While Caracalla envisioned his destiny in the clamor of battle and the conquest of lands, Geta found solace in intellectual debates and the quietude of books. One prepared for governance through force, the other for the subjugation of minds. Soon, the palace was filled with hushed whispers. Courtiers, closely observing the brothers' every gesture, could not help but notice Caracalla's undisguised animosity towards Geta's peaceable nature, accusing him of effeminacy, weakness of spirit, and unsuitability for governing the empire. Geta, for his part, learned to keep his thoughts to himself and avoid encounters with his brother, seeking refuge in the library halls and striving to remain out of his sight. This was no mere sibling rivalry, but an atmosphere steeped in menace and intimidation. In this intricate web of relationships, Julia Domna, the mother of both heirs, played a pivotal role. An educated woman, influential in Roman philosophical circles, she strove to maintain a delicate balance between her sons. She supported Geta's intellectual pursuits, surrounding him with wise tutors who nurtured his thirst for knowledge, while simultaneously praising Caracalla's martial prowess displayed in the training arena. She understood perfectly that the future of the dynasty rested upon them, and she made every effort to prevent their disagreements from escalating into open hostility that could destroy the empire. In the absence of their father, constantly occupied with military campaigns that glorified his name across the empire, the tension between Septimius Severus's sons escalated. Upon his return, the emperor misinterpreted Geta's submissiveness, seeing it as deference to his elder brother, unaware that fear lay beneath it. Thus, a silent rivalry was brewing in the palace, ready to erupt like a bolt from the blue. Childhood games transformed into a struggle for influence, where every gesture from one was perceived as a challenge by the other. Rome was yet unaware that this animosity would fracture not only the family, but the entire empire. With the passing years, the disparity between the young princes became increasingly pronounced, fueling rumors about the future of the empire. In Rome, where power often changed hands through intrigue, civil wars, or favoritism, the question of dynastic succession was always a source of tension. Senators, closely observing the imperial family's life, were divided in their opinions. Some considered Caracalla a worthy heir, seeing in him the strength, courage, and resilience capable of striking fear into enemies. Others believed that Geta, with his intellect, judiciousness, and philosophical education, embodied the stability Rome needed after turbulent times. News of this circulated throughout Rome, reaching the brothers' ears. Caracalla, possessing an explosive temperament, perceived any display of sympathy towards Geta as a personal affront and an encroachment upon his authority. The notion that his younger brother might usurp his position was unbearable, and he grew ever more convinced of his own exceptionalism. Geta, conversely, did not seek open conflict. Prone to reflection and compromise, he preferred to avoid direct confrontations. However, his very existence, his admirable qualities, served as a constant source of irritation for Caracalla. Thus, a vicious cycle formed. The more Geta demonstrated his intellect and composure, the more fiercely Caracalla strived to prove his superiority. In this tense atmosphere, Septimius Severus adopted a dual stance. The emperor, having endured the harsh school of war and believing in force as the foundation of power, saw Caracalla as his successor. Yet he could not ignore Geta's merits, whose judiciousness and political acumen reminded him of great philosopher-emperors. Seeking to preserve a fragile peace, Severus made an unprecedented decision in Roman history to divide power between both brothers, making them co-rulers. The prospect of divided power, though seemingly reasonable, in reality only widened the chasm between the brothers. Caracalla perceived this as a veiled threat to his sole rule. To share supreme authority, especially with a brother he despised, was unacceptable to him. Geta, conversely, saw the proposal as recognition of his own importance, yet simultaneously realized he would become a target for even greater hatred. Thus, the ominous seed of tragedy was sown. Rome stood on the brink of a future where the rivalry of two brothers would escalate into a colossal struggle, drawing the Senate, the army, and millions of the empire's citizens into its vortex. The year 211 AD marked a pivotal moment in Roman history and for the destinies of the two heirs to the throne. Septimius Severus, who had reigned for nearly 2 decades, died in Eboracum, modern-day York, in Britannia during a military campaign against northern tribes. The ailing and exhausted emperor had brought both his sons with him so they could witness firsthand the command of an army in frontier conditions. News of his demise swiftly spread throughout the empire. Severus's passing deprived Rome of a leader who had united the country after long years of civil wars, a man strict, pragmatic, and convinced of the need to maintain power through military discipline. However, Severus's most perilous legacy was not his conquests, but the political testament he bequeathed to his sons. On his deathbed, as historical chronicles, particularly the accounts of Cassius Dio, attest, Septimius Severus left his descendants an admonition that resonated through generations: be united, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others. These words conveyed a blend of cynicism and pragmatism: maintain fraternal unity, generously reward the legions, and disregard the interests of civil society. Unfortunately, there was not even a hint of accord between Caracalla and Geta. Contrary to expectations, the emperor's dying wish, which proclaimed both brothers as co-rulers rather than strengthening the dynasty, foreshadowed an era of discord for Rome. Caracalla and Geta, clad in the purple robes of Augusti and participating in state ceremonies, began to establish their own centers of influence behind a veneer of unity. The army, the cornerstone of the empire, became a battleground for loyalty. Soldiers admired Caracalla's harsh temperament and military prowess, seeing in him a born commander. Geta, who lacked his brother's charisma on the battlefield, won the favor of officers with his judiciousness and ability to build rapport with the provinces. The Senate, that venerable assembly, was split into opposing factions. Some senators leaned towards preserving the status quo, viewing Geta as a guarantor of stability and continuity. Others, conversely, placed their hopes in Caracalla, whose decisiveness and authoritarianism appealed to their vision of a strong leader. Even within the walls of the imperial palace, a symbol of power and grandeur, an atmosphere of discord reigned. The brothers, unable to find common ground, divided the Palatine Hill between them like two warring states. It was whispered that temporary walls had been erected at their command to avoid unwelcome encounters and confrontations. Thus, the vast empire was effectively governed by two separate courts, coexisting under one roof, but filled with mutual animosity. During this tumultuous period, Julia Domna, the emperor's mother, filled with maternal love and political sagacity, desperately tried to avert the impending catastrophe. Holding the title of Augusta and serving as an influential advisor, she acted as a mediator, striving to restore a harmony that slipped further from her grasp each day. She understood perfectly that the animosity between her sons could plunge the entire empire into an abyss of chaos and civil war. However, despite her keen intellect and extensive experience, she proved powerless to halt the hatred that had taken root in the brothers' hearts since childhood. Septimius Severus's legacy, intended to strengthen and unite the imperial family, had become a deadly trap, threatening to destroy them all. Rome, accustomed to strong centralized authority, found itself at the mercy of two rulers incapable of trusting each other. And as often happened in Rome's tumultuous history, such tension could only be resolved by bloodshed, portending dark times for the empire. Following Geta's tragic demise in December 211 AD, the Roman Empire confronted a new grim reality. Caracalla, stained by fratricide, ruled the state alone. The act, conceived as a means of political survival, became an ominous hallmark of his reign. Caracalla usurped absolute power with the same untamed fury with which he had ended his brother's life. The initial months of his rule were permeated by an atmosphere of fear and brutal repression. The palace was awash with ominous rumors. Senators trod with extreme caution, and aristocratic families, many closely connected to Geta, realized that even the slightest misstep could cost them their lives. The emperor was shrouded in a veil of distrust, trusting no one. Julia Domna, the emperor's mother, retained her influential position at court, yet their relationship was forever darkened by the tragedy. Having witnessed the fratricide, she became an eternal, living reproach, symbolizing Rome's deepest wound. Although Caracalla continued to value her counsel, an invisible wall of silence, woven from guilt and mutual resentment, arose between them. In the political sphere, Caracalla demonstrated pragmatism. He understood that Geta's murder had left deep scars, and terror alone was insufficient to consolidate his power. In 212 AD, he issued the famous Constitutio Antoniniana, a decree that made history by granting Roman citizenship to all free men of the empire. This step was presented as an act of inclusivity and a drive for unity, but beyond that, it also pursued fiscal objectives, significantly expanding the tax base. During Caracalla's reign, the Roman Empire underwent a complex period of transformation, where the emperor's personal ambitions intertwined with the political realities of the era. Caracalla, who ascended to the throne after eliminating his brother Geta, sought to consolidate his power and leave his mark on history, much like the great conquerors of the past. Caracalla, admiring Alexander the Great, emulated his manners and style of governance. He organized military expeditions in the East, dreaming of glory comparable to his idol's achievements. However, the Roman Empire, unlike Alexander's young and expansive empire, was a complex structure focused on preserving its existing borders. Geta's tragic murder haunted Caracalla even during his military campaigns. Despite their formal obedience, many soldiers regarded him with suspicion. Historians recount the nightmares that plagued the emperor nightly, in which he saw the bloodied image of his brother. Rumors circulated that he avoided the rooms where Geta had spent his childhood, fearing his ghost. Caracalla attempted to compensate for his inner turmoil with large-scale construction projects, among which the Baths of Caracalla stood out, a magnificent complex that became a symbol of his reign. These imperial baths, accommodating thousands of citizens, combined luxury, advanced engineering solutions, and political propaganda. Through these structures, Caracalla sought to present himself to the people as a benefactor, a man capable of bestowing greatness upon Rome, despite the brutality of his ascent to power. Yet, behind the outward splendor lay violence. The emperor's paranoia led to the execution of thousands, from generals suspected of disloyalty to ordinary citizens accused of treason. Fratricide left a deep wound in his soul, and in an attempt to defend himself from real and imagined enemies, he responded with bloodshed. In the Senate's annals and popular memory, Caracalla was remembered as a ruler whose reign was based more on fear than on love and respect. Some recalled him as a ruthless warrior, others as a despotic tyrant. However, all agreed that Geta's murder marked a fatal turning point in the empire's history. From then on, Rome was under the rule not of a legitimate successor, but of a man who ascended the throne having committed a heinous crime, the murder of his own brother. The ominous echoes of this tragedy could not be silenced by decrees, triumphal arches, or victorious conquests. Caracalla's rule became a feverish attempt to justify his power and earn history's forgiveness, but every step he took only deepened his dark reputation in the annals of the Severan dynasty. It seemed Caracalla's fate was sealed the moment the fatal dagger ended his brother's life. This monstrous act was not merely a political victory, it became an invisible curse that pursued him until his last days. He ruled Rome with an iron fist, erected magnificent monuments, and granted citizenship to millions of subjects. But behind this impregnable mask of power lay an emperor consumed by paranoia and tormented by the ghost of the murdered Geta. In the ensuing years, Caracalla's reign devolved into a relentless succession of military campaigns. War became a kind of refuge for the emperor, an attempt to escape the tormenting ghosts of the past that haunted him even within the palace walls. In the German territories, he led legions to suppress revolts, striving to project the image of an invincible leader. In Dacia, he expanded the empire's borders with fire and sword, regardless of the losses. However, in the east, where Caracalla sought to imitate the great Alexander the Great, his ambitions escalated into a dangerous obsession. In 214 AD, he marched into Asia Minor and Syria, openly declaring his intention to conquer Persia. His army followed, but amongst the officers, discontent and murmurs grew, many secretly speaking of Caracalla's instability. It was said that he often conversed with himself in his tent, awoke in terror in the middle of the night, shouting Geta's name, and demanded sacrifices in foreign temples, desperately trying to find an atonement that seemed impossible. His manic fascination with Alexander even led him to Troy, where he paid homage to the hero Achilles, as if hoping to find in these rituals forgiveness for his atrocities, forgiveness that Rome, it seemed, could never grant him. Meanwhile, in Rome, a campaign to eradicate Geta's memory unfolded. Official documents were meticulously revised and rewritten, coins were melted down, and portraits of the younger Severan on frescoes and mosaics were mercilessly destroyed or replaced with images of Caracalla. The aim of this large-scale operation was crystal clear: to erase all mention of Geta, as if he had never existed. Following Geta's tragic death, a wave of repression swept through Rome like an ominous shadow. More than 20,000 people, from loyal supporters to ordinary servants, met a dreadful fate: execution. This brutal crackdown, planned with cold calculation, was intended to stifle any protest against the new emperor's ascension. Caracalla sought to eradicate even the slightest doubt about his legitimacy, transforming Rome into a realm of fear and silence. But no amount of violence can erase the memory of a heinous deed. Geta's murder left a deep imprint on the public consciousness. In hushed tones, Caracalla was whispered about as a fratricide, a ruler who betrayed not only blood ties, but also the very principles upon which Rome stood. The palace stones seemed to bear silent witness to the terrible crime, and historians and eyewitnesses passed down through generations the story of how kin blood was sacrificed for absolute power. In December 211 AD, Rome faced a new cruel reality. The empire found itself in the hands of a man stained by fratricide. What began as a desperate attempt at political survival transformed into a stigma that would forever define Caracalla's reign. From the first days of his sole rule, Caracalla unleashed his fury upon Rome. Fear and repression became commonplace. The palace transformed into an epicenter of intrigue and sinister rumors. Senators moved cautiously, every word and gesture weighed, for the slightest mistake could cost a life. Noble families connected to Geta realized their well-being hung by a thread. The emperor trusted no one. His once close relationship with his mother was irreparably shattered. Julia Domna, though retaining her influence at court, remained forever a witness to the fratricide that occurred before her eyes. This tragedy left an indelible mark on her soul and became an eternal wound for all of Rome. Although Caracalla still heeded her advice, their communication was overshadowed by a silent burden of guilt and mutual resentment. In the political sphere, Caracalla showed pragmatism, realizing that Geta's murder had severely damaged his reputation. Terror alone was insufficient to consolidate power. In 212 AD, he issued the famous Constitutio Antoniniana, or Edict of Caracalla, which granted Roman citizenship to all free men residing within the empire. This step was presented as an act of unification and inclusivity, but it also pursued fiscal objectives, significantly expanding the tax base. Caracalla aspired to emulate Alexander the Great, seeing him as a role model. He copied his manner of dress, gestures, and style of governance, conducting military campaigns in the East in the hope of replicating his idol's glory. However, his ambitions clashed with a harsh reality. The Roman Empire was no longer the young and rapidly expanding power it had been in Alexander's time. It had become a cumbersome machine, struggling to maintain its borders. The tragic event of Geta's murder, like an ominous shadow, relentlessly followed him even on military campaigns. The soldiers displayed obedience, yet in the eyes of many, hidden distrust could be read. Historians of the time recount the nocturnal nightmares that tormented Caracalla, in which the bloodied face of his murdered brother appeared to him. Rumors circulated that he avoided the chambers where Geta had spent his youth, as if fearing that his brother's spirit still lingered within the palace walls. In an attempt to suppress these dark visions, the emperor embarked on massive construction projects and public initiatives. Among these, the Baths of Caracalla held a special place, a grandiose complex that became a hallmark of his era. These imperial baths, capable of accommodating thousands of visitors, represented a blend of luxury, advanced engineering solutions, and political propaganda. By erecting these structures, Caracalla aimed to present himself as a champion of the people, a ruler who, despite the brutality of his rise to power, was capable of restoring Rome's former greatness. However, behind this magnificence, violence still lurked. Consumed by paranoia, he executed thousands, from generals who aroused suspicion to ordinary citizens accused of treason. The fratricide left an unhealing wound in his soul, and in an attempt to defend himself from real and imagined enemies, he responded with torrents of blood. In the annals of history, Caracalla appears as a figure who inspired fear rather than love, both in the hearts of senators and the common people. Some remembered him as a warrior, merciless in his fury, others as a despot whose will knew no bounds. However, all unanimously acknowledged that Geta's murder marked a fateful turning point that altered the course of history. Rome lost its legitimate ruler, falling under the sway of a man whose ascent to the throne was marred by a heinous crime. fratricide. This tragedy could not be consigned to oblivion by decrees, triumphal arches, or conquering campaigns. Caracalla's reign became a desperate attempt to justify his power, to earn history's forgiveness, but every step he took only deepened his descent into the dark chronicle of the Severan dynasty. It seemed Caracalla's very destiny was predetermined the moment the blade stained his brother's blood. This villainous act was not merely a political victory, it became an invisible burden that pursued him until his last days. He ruled Rome with an iron grip, erected magnificent structures, and granted citizenship to millions. But beneath the facade of power lay an emperor consumed by paranoia and tormented by Geta's ghost. In subsequent years, Emperor Caracalla was embroiled in an unending series of military campaigns. He saw war as an escape from the nightmares that plagued him, pursuing him even within the imperial palace. In the German lands, he led legions to suppress rebellions, striving to assert his image as an invincible commander. In Dacia, he expanded the empire's borders with fire and sword. However, in the east, where Caracalla sought to imitate Alexander the Great, his ambitious plans escalated into unbridled obsession. In 214 AD, he traveled to Asia Minor and Syria, loudly proclaiming his intention to conquer Persia. His army followed him, but among the officers, whispers about the emperor's instability grew more frequent. It was said that he conversed with himself in his tent, awoke in terror in the middle of the night, shouting Geta's name, and ordered sacrifices in foreign temples, vainly hoping for atonement. His maniacal fascination with Alexander went so far that he visited Troy, where he paid homage to the hero Achilles, as if hoping to find in these rituals forgiveness for his misdeeds, a forgiveness that Rome would never have granted him.